Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today we are having a blast from the past. Today's guest is Gary Kellogg, the former head of Citizens Utilities and Vermont's North Country Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Oh, Scott, nice to be here.
And I also should also say you're also one of the brains behind my publication, Vermont's Northland Journal, because everybody else told me, don't do it, you're going to go broke. And 13 years later, I'm still chugging along.
All right. No, I think that the part that I always, when you and I used to talk about it, was that I kept seeing how rich the history was up here. You know, and when you come from a town in Arizona, where I came from, that was founded in 1964, there's not much rich history. There's some,
right,
and it's kind of unique in that respect. But here, I mean, you go back hundreds of years, and you know, it was just, wow. It had to be captured before it was lost.
Well, you know the thing is, I did think of you during the economic downturn, and I was thinking, and what did Gary get me into?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you know, actually, we kind of met through our mutual love of history. Well, I was a writer for the Chronicle,
right,
and you were kind of like a pig at a pig roast.
Right.
This was during a period of time when Citizen Utilities was going through a transition period because there was a lot of wars being waged on the Clyde River.
Right. And
I think you were brought in because you're such a common sense type of guy, and it's really hard to hate you. and so, but you were brought here to operate Citizens, but you did have to lead it through some really trying times.
We had some difficult times. We were under the gun from the state, so we had some things that we had to turn around, so it was challenging. Actually, you and I met because you were a reporter reporting on some of the outages and some of the problems that we were having.
And the explosion of when the dam washed out and everything.
Yeah, I came in just after that. There was an interim guy that was brought in, John, that was brought in. Then I came in right after him. I came here, and my first visit was June of '97, and I came here officially in September. I moved, my daughter and I then came up here.
Well, it was really because of my time with the Chronicle, but particularly covering the Clyde River, that I realized that everything, well, there's some things that I knew that I really didn't know. And that's how come it became important to me to start trying to record the history before it's distorted over time. Like things that I grew up knowing about the Clyde River, I found out I really didn't know. It was distorted over time, and sometimes not accidentally. Like there was I grew up here and by a fishery group talking about the good old days, talking about when the salmon could run from the ocean all the way up to Island Pond. Sounded very logical because no doubt there was a really good fishery there. But it sounds like a great story, but it's not true. Because they couldn't make it up over Arnold's Falls. It was and besides that they couldn't even make it to Lake Memphremagog after 1830 something because of the dams, if they could make it up there at all.
Right.
And but my first few years working for the Chronicle, I actually recorded the myth as fact, as I think a lot of reporters do. And then once you dig down, you realize everything. Half of what I knew, I now know was wrong. So it was because of our meeting there.
Yeah,
that
we went over the old pictures and the old stories, and then the people that you've interviewed, certainly that can take history clear back then.
And I'm not giving Citizens a free pass for the decades earlier.
No,
because
there was those skirts weren't all clean either.
But it did. It really. And I just remember meeting with you. We were talking about, hey, I got this idea, and you were probably about the 30th person, and about 29 of them said, stick with reporting. And but you gave me the optimism to move forward, and that was it.
Yeah, well, that journal has a place on my coffee table when it comes every month, and I read it cover to cover because there's always just having spent 9 years up here, there's always something in there that I can remember hearing just briefly about, or oh yeah, I can relate to that, and especially, you know, because she's a relative, like when you did the stories on Ruth Austin, you know, and go back and look at that, because here there's 100 years, and you know the lady's still just sharp as a tack, and
100 years old, and she can remember the exact car she first bought. She could tell you how much she bought it for, what color it was, and then the time that her car broke down on Main Street, and this guy came over and started razzing her, hey, you're going to flood it. She ended up marrying the guy. So she's filled with
some great stories.
So you really did, you made an impact here in the region, and you ended up bringing home, you moved back to Arizona, but you also brought a little piece of the Northeast Kingdom with you, as in you brought your wife.
Yeah. Kathy and I were married in 2005 out in. We actually got married. She came out there, and then we went up and had a wonderful wedding. It was supposed to turn out to just be a small little wedding with just the kids and us. But then all the family from Arizona decided they were going to fly out, and then all of my friends in Havasu said, you're not going to get by with that. So they all came out. They came up to the wedding. So yeah. So now we have family and kids. We have my son in Lake Tahoe and a grandchild there. We have 2 in Montana, 1 here, 2 in Texas, and 2 in Lake Havasu City.
When my wife and I go out in October to visit,
right?
So it sounds to me like everybody who goes out there to visit you seems to stay there.
Well, well, I guess that would be up to you then. So
well,
as far as history writing go, it'll be brief if that was the line of work you were looking for. But no, I think you know, it'll be fun to show you what Arizona looks like a little bit, and let you. And I think it's always neat, because when I came up here, you know, I mean, one of the first people I met was Jim Campbell.
Right.
And Jim took me kind of all over the place, and he showed me things that you know you wouldn't see if you were a normal tourist just going through. And so, you know, and then after a while, you know, you start to learn about those places. Well, in Arizona, when people visit me, you're going to visit me, and then I think later, after the first of the year, Jim is supposed to come out and visit me. I can show you places and things on the lake that, you know, you wouldn't normally find in the normal scheme of things.
And that's the thing about, I often laugh about the way the Northeast Kingdom is sometimes promoted, as you probably sometimes kind of chuckle how your area sometimes is promoted, because sometimes I think when we market an area, we make it so sterile and boring. Is, you know, I want to experience an area the way the locals experience. I don't want it like there's a, for example, there's a video of Newport that was made 2-3 years ago. No disrespect, but when I watched it, it's like, oh wow, that must be the Newport of the future, because that isn't the Newport of today.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're right. Those are interesting things to see. You know, like I had often shared with you, we have a very dynamic website. We have a visitors and convention bureau where we're at. And so, you know, that really kind of shows you what the town looks like. In Havasu, people will say, oh yeah, you're the spring break capital of the world. That's a very small piece of business that takes place, and very controlled and everything. But, you know, one of those things can set you up for that, you know, that, oh my God, it's just crazy and wild. Yeah, it's on a little piece of the lake, and it's really quite well controlled. They actually do them like tourist groups now, where they come in like in a group thing, you know. They put wristbands on them, and the whole thing is...
So what's the deal with the London Bridge over there?
London Bridge, okay. Well, I came to Havasu in 1973, 2 years after the bridge was dedicated. What McCulloch did was he was looking for, he had bought the property and he was developing the town, but he needed a hook. You know, you got to remember, McCulloch was a developer first and foremost, and he hired a guy by the name of C.V. Wood, who was a master planner for Disney, and he was a genius. Okay, when it came to all this stuff. So they had heard about that the London Bridge was sinking into the river in England, and so they thought, well, you know, and it's going to either be torn down or whatever. So the deal was actually, this is as far as I know, the deal was actually cut in the Rockefeller's offices in New York for the bridge. And it was done about the same time they were dealing on the Queen Mary to go to San Diego. And so there's only one guy alive now who was a young attorney then, who was part of that process, and we interviewed him out in Arizona. a couple of years ago, so it was quite interesting. So they brought the bridge over and they disassembled it, they labeled it, put it on ocean-going barges, brought it into the port of Los Angeles, then put it on trucks and started caravanning the trucks up to the middle of the desert. They built all 5 spans, as you know, and then the arches were all put in on dry land, okay, because it was a peninsula that ran out into the lake like this. And then they built the bridge on dry land, and then when it was all done, they started digging the channel out first in the middle, dug it all the way out, and then they blew the ends out and formed a channel through there. So we just call it the channel goes under the bridge. His original plan, you know, and I'm one of the few people that got to see it, I was really lucky, was there's an English village located right by the bridge. He was going to do an English village across the little channel. He was going to do a French village, and over here a German village, and kind of make it a European theme. And they even planned in one of those people movers like they did in Disneyland. That was, again, that was the effect of his partner having been the master planner there, Woods. And so, you know, that's all changed. Some of those things stayed, some of them left. Even our English village now, so to speak, is undergoing transition and stuff. So that's how it came. And then so he began to market as the American home of the London Bridge.
So has it worked?
Yeah, I mean, it was the draw, you know. It's now become less of an item, and the lake has really become much more important. Before, we were like a community that had a bridge with a lake with it, okay? Now we really do have a lake with a bridge with it. And you kind of hit on something earlier in your conversation. What we began to see change in Arizona, especially in Havasu, was our fathers' generations. I have to kind of say they were more like, we use the term looky-loos. They like to look and go through that. The younger generation, us, you and you hit on it, you want an experience.
Right.
So I would call them the do's, okay? So they come for that. So that's what's changed. The bridge is still nice, but it's not everything it was, you know, 30, 40 years ago. So, but it's still quite celebrated in town. You know, we do a London Bridge Day parade. We celebrate the dedication of the bridge every year with about a 2 or 3 day event. So.
Now, what is it? Because when you were here, you headed up Citizens, and you also were a mover and a shaker in in trying to redevelop this area. But now, what is it that you do in Arizona?
I went back when I left here, you know, because then when the co-op bought out Citizens, then it was in essence time for me to move on. So I had decided whether I was going to stay here. Well, I had an offer to go to work for the utility company that bought out Citizens in Arizona. So I went to work there. I wasn't there just a few months when the Economic Development Agency, it's called the Partnership for Economic Development Agency, needed a CEO. And so somebody said, you know, because Citizens had always trained us as managers in those areas. How do you help your community grow? Because it's good for the utility. And so I had the credentials, and so I submitted my application and got in the interview process, and next thing you know, I was. So I've been in the position since 2005, and so we're just a small operation of 2 people, and I'm the president and CEO of a 2-man operation. So. Have
you amounted to a lot, though?
It has. It's really, we've done some amazing things. We built a business park, small, just a 19-acre business park. We have 1 tenant in there. But you have to remember, from 2005 until just a couple years ago, that recession hit Arizona the hardest of anybody. So, you know, we really had to wade through some stuff. And kind of like what you talked about with Newport, Arizona, and especially Havasu, tourism is our backbone, Scott. I mean, the lake is a big draw, the desert, the desert hiking, the fishing. In fact, next year, I just got an announcement while I was here from our Visitors and Convention Bureau. We will host, for the first time ever on the West Coast, the Bassmasters fishing tournament, and that is absolutely huge. So tourism really still is the backbone. So we do a lot to support that. We also do a lot to support education with my organization. But we landed a Budweiser distributor who had been in another part of the county, and he wanted to put his corporate offices because he actually has the distribution from the northern border of Arizona all the way to the Mexican border on what we would call the Arizona Strip, right down through there. And so he located there. He brought some nice jobs with him. We're attracting small companies, anywhere from 10 to 15 employees. And they're usually companies now, Scott, that say, that maybe the climate in California doesn't work for them anymore or whatever. And so they begin to come. And so we have a lot of small companies like that. Havasu learned its lesson years ago. When McCulloch first formed the town, he brought his chainsaw operation there. When I moved there in 1973, he had 1,100 employees out of a town of 7,500 people work for the chainsaw. Well, eventually he got out of the bid. They sold it to Black & Decker, and everything went downhill. Well, when you have that single employer, we all have seen that happen in many towns. It's tough, and it was a tough comeback from all of that. But now we're getting, what we work on is diversification all the time.
Yeah, because your wife is from here and you lived here for a few years, you must keep really up on what's going on up here.
I have your subscription. Yeah. I have the newspaper. I get it sent to me all the time, and then just talking with Kathy's family.
Right, and the one thing I will say, maybe it sounds better coming out of my mouth than somebody who wasn't born and raised here. Sometimes I think there's an element of us that celebrates failure, and it's like we almost are afraid to move ahead. Like, I commend Bill Stinger for trying.
Absolutely.
For trying, but there's an element that I don't know if they're afraid of moving forward or not, but when something, it's like when the waterfront project, I understand. I do understand why some people didn't want the waterfront conference center there, and I respect that. But then there's another group. It's like, yes, he failed again, and it's like almost like a celebration. It's like you want to stay, you just don't want to move, because I'm even ambivalent about some elements of it. But every once in a while, I think that we ought to get a truckload of Prozac and dump it in the water. And as I said, my family's been here right across the border in Quebec since the glaciers were here. So
long time.
Yeah. So I feel comfortable in saying that. But do you think we can? Do you think we can move forward?
Yes, I think absolutely. These things take time. It's crazy. We are, like I said, Havasu formed and it was founded in 1964. We're transitioning our downtown right now. We're forming an essential services district, so they become a little more self-sufficient. There can be self-taxing, because even our little downtown area, it's a short distance, was made kind of like an old 50s downtown, the Main Street. Right. And we have other areas that are wider and bigger and stuff like that, but he wanted that. Well, now that's caused some issues, so now we're transforming that into more of a dining, entertainment kind of a district area with maybe some boutique shops, but it has not been without its pain. I mean, I can tell you, we have a term out in our area, and it's about these. It's called cave folks, cave people. It's really citizens against virtually everything. And Scott, when I first went to Havasu in '73, and then a couple years later we hit 10,000 people, the town was already too big for some people, and they didn't like it at 10. We're now 54,000 people, and so it begins to change. But for me, I look and say, you know what? I hope everything I do really is not for me or even my generation. We're doing all right. What are we doing for the guys that are behind us, our kids, that next generation following up? That's what we build the downtowns for. And, I'm envious of Newport in that you still have that old downtown. You have some of the older buildings that are magic, and thank God when they built the state building, it still had that old flavor. It had the nice architecture that kind of looked like it'd been there for a number of years. So, yeah, I mean, my hat's off to Bill Stinger. Is it easy? Oh gosh, no.
And you're going to fail in some areas, but and some people accuse me of looking through the world through rose-colored glasses, which is okay. But first of all, I think the greater area is doing very well, because you can't look at just Newport in a microcosm. Derby is becoming the commercial center. That's where the commercial parts are going to be. The downtown, but on the other hand, you can't relocate what Newport has, the lake and everything, to Derby. And then we have farming coming back, alternative farming. We have so much going on here. And the thing is sometimes I really believe that to move forward, we have to let go of the myth of Newport, because there's a lot of myth that is perpetuated as fact. It's like, or at least half truths. Like we talk about the good old days when Newport was booming, when Main Street had cars. That's true. But well, wait a minute here.
Different era.
Is Main Street was doing well, but what about right over Gardner Park, where you had the smoldering dump right in the middle of town? You had the railroad yard, the North Yard, and then which was all polluted and everything. Newport, the heyday of Newport wasn't as wonderful as we like to fantasize about, because Newport was a poor community. The Newport that I grew up in the 1970s was even poorer than it is today. Sometimes I think we've grasped a hold of this, I'm not saying myth, I guess, but it was a short period of time where Main Street had those discount stores and everything. So I think we have to look at Newport's history for what it is and celebrate what it really was, and then start to move forward and bring bits and pieces of it forward.
Well, I think when you guys embraced that RUDAD study for the downtown area, it starts to lay you out a map of possibilities for the future. And so, it is the magic. I mean, I sat the other day on the east side deck having lunch, and then later on dinner, and this time when we came up for a family wedding, and so our daughter Emily and her boyfriend came with us. Well, he's never been east of the Mississippi.
Right.
Okay, he's a desert boy, and he sat there and he just in wonderment, and he said, "Oh my God," he says, "just so beautiful," and it is. I mean, you have to. Every time I come back, I look at that lake and go, "Oh, how beautiful!" And then I had the opportunity to go up Tuesday because he's a great golfer, and we went up and played Jay Peak.
And I heard it kicked your butt.
Well, you know what? It's way over my head. What a beautiful course, but I'm not a Jay Peak kind of guy. I'm more of a flat, easy kind of course.
Right.
But he's a very good golfer, and we just had a wonderful time. But again, what an asset. Then looking over at those hotels up there, I often visualized, even when that all started, of a place like Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where Jackson Hole becomes the city that's in support of the surrounding ski areas, and Newport almost sits in that same kind of pocket, as that stuff develops, some of that overflows onto the town, So.
And without your predecessor, Al Flory, Jay Peak may have never have happened.
Yeah, God bless Al. I was so privileged. People said, "Well, how did you know Al?" Well, I joined Citizens in 1973 in Arizona, and every 3 years they used to have what they call a triennial managers meeting at a place in Arizona. It was a dude ranch down in Wickenburg. Yeah. And that was my first opportunity to meet that cigar smoking Al.
Oh yeah, I was going to say.
and he was a star at that one because every manager from a different property, and they had them from Vermont to Kauai, had to bring a little gift for the other managers, something little. Well, Al always brought maple syrup, so he was absolutely, but he was even back then, Al was a very outspoken guy.
I knew Al all my life, and as I say, his stogie was about as long, as tall as he was. Yeah. A little bit exaggeration.
Interesting guy.
But it was a different. I could imagine now with all this political correct stuff and environmental. I can imagine Al trying to run a utility company now, because he was a strong leader, but he also, that was back in the day where things could be a little looser.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it was, but certainly all that began to change, and so he and I would we were in Rotary here together when I was living up here, and then we'd meet occasionally and have lunch and kind of talk about the past and the company like that and stuff. But yeah, he was a man of his time.
Right. Yeah. So do you think, I'm the eternal optimist for the future of Newport? Because as I said, I think there's so much positive. If you just stop for a minute to look beyond Newport, I think there's a lot of positive that's going on. But even Newport, I think we have a very good mayor, Paul Manette. He's a very hands-on guy. Yeah, we've had some setbacks, but I still have to believe we can move forward. Even myself, I've stumbled a bit on my rose-colored glasses have fell off a couple times, and I've become doubtful. But I still think we can.
Well, I was talking with Paul the other day, and it was just interesting because he still has that very optimistic look. We're kind of blessed with a mayor very similar to him in personality, and our mayor is a really good guy, and it always has a look to the future. You know, and I think the most important thing for towns is, you know, when you have city managers like John Ward, they have to steer communities, you know, regardless of who's the mayor, through difficult times. And in Arizona, we had to make some tough decisions. We had to cut the city budget tremendously. We had over 150 employees had to eventually go away, you know, in the city because we had hit those tough economic times, you know, and so, but I think the biggest thing is to continue to remain optimistic, you know, absolutely. I think it's exciting what's happening downtown. So, you know, for gosh sake, I think, you know, folks, give Bill Stinger that opportunity, because it's the building blocks of the future, Scott. It's a reason that maybe your kids will someday say, you know what, we're going to move back to Newport because things are good there for us now.
Actually, my boys probably won't, because they married women from Maine, and they're full. But they could move back right now and find well-paying jobs because of their education and their expertise. My daughter, much to my surprise, because she was kind of like the world traveler. She's gone through Europe. She's lived in Australia while she was in college, and I never thought she would be saying, and she never thought it. And she's met this great guy who works for the federal government, and she now lives back in Vermont after attending grad school at UVM, and she can't, because of the nature of his work, they can't live quite in the kingdom, but they're going to live in the burbs of the kingdom once they get to it.
Yeah,
so,
nice,
but no, that really surprised me. And but you said something about is it your son-in-law that you golfed with?
No, you know, it's actually my daughter's boyfriend.
Oh, daughter's boyfriend. Okay. Maybe I'm just seeing premonitions here.
That's all right. Somebody better tell her that.
Yeah. But sometimes I think we who grew up here, or even who've lived here for decades, we kind of stop seeing the beauty. Yeah. And I think and I don't think it's only us who grew up here. As I said, you know, if you've lived in a place long enough, and because every once in a while, people send me photos to put on my Facebook from around the Northeast Kingdom.
Oh, I see the sunsets and all that.
And every once in a while, it's like, wow. Now, granted, I'm not one of these people who believes that the Northeast Kingdom is the most beautiful place in the world. I find beauty almost wherever I go. And, you know, but I do think it is really beautiful.
Yeah, I find it too. You know, you'll visit me in October. And the same thing, every time I take somebody out on Lake Havasu, take them in a boat underneath the London Bridge, I see it through a different set of eyes, you know, and so you come to appreciate where you live. And it's like here when I come back, you know, I look at the lake and I go, oh my gosh, how pretty is this? And last night we were downtown, we had dinner at La Belvedere, okay? And so I take the granddaughter who's 2 years old and walk her along that path. Now, and I remember when I first came here, Scott, there were still the old rundown boathouses there. Yeah. And I remember going to a meeting with the then Senator Jim Greenwood at the city, and it was a senior citizens thing. And so there was a lot of certainly older folks there. And he was talking about the new state building and what it would look like and how this was all going to happen. And I'll never forget, one little old lady stood up and she said, "With all due respect, Senator, you can take your state building and put it up where the sun doesn't shine." She says, "I want my boathouses back." And so, you know, right away you knew that, you know, the change is a four-letter word sometimes for some people. But, you know, ultimately I remember when they were looking at doing the last bit of grading, and Jersey.
Yeah, Jersey Drown.
Jersey Drown said, you know what, if you just do this elevation thing, or lower it, we'll still maintain a beautiful view, you know. And I got to give Governor Dean credit, because it was at an open meeting with Governor Dean, and he said to his architect guys, he said, you know, that's a great idea. So they did that, and ultimately, you know, that became a lovely area. And so, you know, I mean, to sit there with my granddaughter and walk along the waterfront, you know, what an enjoyable experience. And now, what do you see there? I would assume you see graduation parties, you see weddings, you know, because here you are looking up that gorgeous lake, winter or summer.
Right. You know, though, when there are still people who look at that state office building and say, "Oh, that's a horrible mess." Like, wait a minute. You know, maybe they should have turned it, because there is a debate. Actually, I don't even think it's debated that there's not enough attention is paid attention to the lake.
To the lake.
But on the other hand, I have photos of right before that area was torn down.
Oh, it was rough.
And it was rough.
Yeah, those buildings still were here when I came in '73. I'm sorry, in '97.
And every once in a while, people will say, "Well, aren't you going to protest tearing down of this building, that building, because they're historic?" No, not just because you're old. It's old doesn't make it historic. Like, I'm not becoming more historic. I'm getting old with every passing day. And so the thing is, but if it's like, for example, if they said, "Hey, let's tear down the Goodrich Library for a parking lot," now that's historic.
No, that's a no-no. That's
You know, Newport, I will tell you though, the one thing that has gone on in the past, we have been great at tearing down historic buildings. Yes. You know, whether it was the railroad station.
The railroad station, exactly.
Yeah, the railroad, or the
saw
Newport
pictures
City,
of that.
the Newport City Hotel is, you know, because we have always been a poor area, sometimes we've just done things to try to just try to survive from day to day. It's like, for example, people say, "Who was the idiot who put the waterfront plaza in where it is today? That was so illogical." No. In the late 60s and early 70s, that was a totally logical idea, because we were, you know, had a recession, and the North Yard had pulled out, and what were we going to do with it? And it made total sense at the time. And contrary to what some people think, Tony Pomelo, as he said, "I did not build it there. He took it over when I believe it went belly up."
Well, I remember when I first came here, that was the fun thing. I mean, I looked at it and I went, wow, the back of the building's facing the lake. So that was, you know, at first you go, how could you see that happen? But, you know, then you understand the history. I understood more of the history of the lake. You know, when you went back several years, this is a working lake, right? I mean, this is where the lumber came in, you know, and this is where the railroad was, and this is where they dumped their ash, kind of where the East Side restaurant was, and all that sort of stuff.
Where the East Side is, where your sister
probably sitting on a bog.
It was, no, that was actually the International Mill.
Was it?
Yeah, the big Actually, I think I gave her a photo, and I think it's up down there, that shows that was the big International Mill, and it burned in the early part of, well, last century, but they created so much sawdust. A lot of what the plaza is built on now is sawdust, because it filled in wetlands, and that's how come like what is now Vista has always had trouble with the floors. It's a combination. Yeah, it's a combination. Right. It's floating kind of on a combination of
pilings.
Pilings, and then swamp, and then sawdust, and that's how come it's. Sure. And that's how come it.
Oh, you know, when I came here in '07, I'll never forget, because in '97 is when I came. I'm sorry. My daughter was 10, and we went to the store there, and she said, "Look, Dad, we can let the grocery cart go and meet us at the other end, you know, because the floors were doing that." Well, you know, and also I think I remember when they put in the new fire station, they had to drive those pilings, you know, forever.
Oh yeah, because I remember when that was a swamp there.
Yeah, otherwise they were not going to have a stable foundation.
Yeah, and I think it's worked real well. But then I also understand Dina, when she was considering, I'm not sure if she's still considering putting a hotel in down here. I think they did
They drove piles,
and
180 feet deep.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's what it took to go down all that far. So.
Right, and but you know, the one thing I will say is, since you moved away, is I enjoy some of your emails or phone calls every once in a while. Because I really thought you would show up today. Like today, what must be about 70, 75 out. I figured you would be here in like a snowsuit or jacket because I know you've gotten kind of spoiled. You'll call me every once in a while and tell me how hard you have it. You're out on the deck shivering at 85 degrees, trying not to have your hands freeze as you flip the burgers.
That's in February.
Yeah. And do you miss this weather?
You know, I do. You know what I miss most of all is I fell in love with the fall up here. I just absolutely, you know, this transition time, it starts now, you know, on into, you know, towards Halloween and stuff. But the changing of the leaves was everything for me. I loved the pumpkins. I used to just decorate the living daylights out of my front porch with all the gourds and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I really like that. Now I have to tell you that when I came here that first year, remember that was the brutal winter when we had some, I think, minus 42 degrees.
Ooh, like this last winter.
That's what I understand.
Oh, bad.
That was quite a time for me because remember I came here and then I went back to Lake Havasu because that's where my daughter and grandkids were. Took my little daughter with me. And we went back for Christmas. And when I got back, our crew said, Gary, we got a problem. There's a phenomena setting in, which was the beginning of the ice storm.
Oh, the ice storm.
And so, you know, here you take a guy from the desert, and now, you know, a third of our system, especially up around Lake Champlain and Isle Lamont and all that, just came down around our ears, you know. And so we went from 50, 60 employees, and then within 3 days we had 250, 300 employees working for us, you know, contractors trying to restore all of that. So that was quite a winter. But I share a story with you, Scott. It was funny because when I first came here, my daughters went to school with Jim Campbell's girls, and so they were playing basketball. And so I had an Explorer with leather seats, right, you know, in it. And we went up to Island Pond that night, and I took my daughter, and it went out to be like 32 below zero that night. And I'll never forget, Jim Campbell was sitting there, and he kind of points this little clicker at the wall, you know, and what does he do? Why is he opening his car? It never dawned on me what he had going for him. Well, he had one of those warmer, right? He could, you know, start it up remote, right? And get everything going. And so we went outside, and my little daughter sits there, and she gets in the car, and it's just, I mean, it's really cold. And she says, "We're gonna die, aren't we, Daddy? We're gonna die out here, you know, because the seats were just stiff and everything." And so I had asked Jim, I said, where'd you get that? And he told me where he bought it. And I went down to see the guy the next day, and I said, I want you to put one of those remote starts in like you did for Jim Campbell. I said, because he says, well, do you want to know how much it costs? I said, I don't really care. I said, because I don't want to go through another minus 32 night like that. But now it's funny, and I have a Suburban in Arizona, and it came with the remote start. Well, out there, when it's 120 degrees, it's nice just to hit the button and cool your car down a little bit. So you get the same thing, just the opposite end of the scale.
Now, do I recall correctly, but you also survived up here through the Y2K phenomenon, because there were some people. Now, granted, I don't know how much, but I think I hate to say, there were some people who went way overboard. You know, the sky's falling. But didn't you get a little trick played on you the night of Y2K?
Yep,
now, explain.
Well, I sure did. We sat there, and so we had every.
You were at the power station.
No, I was actually at the office.
Oh, okay.
We were on there. We had everything monitored, and everybody was in place. We even had then the first starting of the satellite communication stuff. We were using satellite radios. And, you know, cost us a fortune. So, and we had spent months preparing for that night.
Because the fear was that
anything that was digital or anything that was going to be affected, you know, because they didn't program it that way. Well, a lot of the stuff like we had at the dam it was not digital. Okay, so everything was just, we didn't have to worry about it. But even then, this little company, we had to spend about $500,000 to make sure that everything in the fields, and we used it as an opportunity to upgrade stuff and things like that. So we're set. We take the generators here in town, you know, that we had on the Clyde, and the ones that were the big diesels, and we had them in what they call a spinning mode. That is, they were ready, Scott, to go. So everything was up, and we cranked towards that evening, and we're sitting there, and I'm sitting there in the break room with everybody, where all the office staff is there, because we're going to, whatever it took. So we're watching the TV, and I'm very intently looking at the television set, and it goes here. We're watching the ball drop in New York, and it goes 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the guy behind me, our computer guy, clicked the light switch off. And I just went, crap, are you kidding me? You know, here it comes. And it didn't dawn on me the TV was still working, just for that split second, you know. So he flips it back on. So somebody said, well, how was it? I said, well, he lost his job. You know, I'm just kidding, he didn't. But, you know, you were so intent because you thought this was the big moment. Turned out to be a non-event for us, period. So, I mean, nothing was affected. But you were right, Scott, a lot of people panicked, but they had those public meetings and they were telling people to buy enough medication for 6 months and all that. We actually always had the capability of supporting Newport with our own generation for many days. And because we had not only the hydro on the Clyde, but those diesels, and we had lined up, and I think they coordinated it through Fred's end, we actually had diesel semis in standby with fuel. You know, we had a pipeline that was literally created to run those diesels for an indefinite period of time. So we could have sustained not all of our system, but certainly the town of Newport indefinitely.
Now, in looking back, do you think if you hadn't done anything, would you have lost electricity?
No.
No.
No, I think, but you know what? We used it as an opportunity because there were some stuff in the field we couldn't verify whether it was going to be Y2K compliant, whether it was going to click. So we used it as an opportunity to upgrade some things, some switches and things like that. So it was an opportunity for us. But the company itself spent literally millions on their accounting system, you know. So again, I don't know would it affected it any other way. I'm not really sure. So.
You know, it's obvious that you had quite the adventure with, you know, that night and that. But when your father moved in, your now late father, I got to admit, it was always interesting to hear what he was up to. Because you got to admit,
colorful.
He was a colorful character, and I just remember hearing your stories, and you never knew what Dad was going to pull.
Yeah, I know. And it was really funny when it came time for me to, after Citizen or the co-op bought us out, and I returned to Arizona. He didn't want to return to Arizona, so I had a little rental house here, and I had my other man. So Dad was in there with a caretaker, and then eventually, unfortunately, you know, Dad suffered a stroke, and he wound up in Bel Air. But I have to tell you, those people at Bel Air, what a blessing, what a wonderful facility, and the care they took of him and stuff. But he used to laugh because my friends would say, you know, when I grow up, I want to be just like your dad. And I said, well, you better hope you got a son that can take care of you, because he was colorful, but not the best financial planner in the world.
Yeah, I know you had told me every once in a while you would look and you'd look and realize he had all your clothes on.
Yeah. Well, that was not unusual. You know, where did this all come from? And then I'll never forget one time, Scott, he got to where he thought that the baby powder made his skin feel good, and I walked in his bedroom and the floor's going poof, poof, poof. So I took him to the doctor and said, doctor, just tell him that this is not good for him, that he really needs. So she says, Marvin, if we're going to get an addiction, let's do it to lotion, you know. So then lotion became his thing. But yeah, he was a very colorful guy. So yeah.
So since your wife is from here, and you're from Arizona, are you ever going to move back?
Oh, I don't know about moving full time. But within the next year or two, I think we're going to come back and spend. I'd like to come back in July and stay until the first snow flies.
So are you gonna retire?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now. So we're gonna talk about this more when we get back to Arizona this year and see what that offers us up there. But I mean, I like spending the falls here and everything, and you know, and I'm still an active member in Rotary in Arizona, and when I come here, I go to the club, you know.
You know what's funny? You said the Rotary, and when you say you're going to buy a place up here, is one of your fellow Rotarians. He just bought a condo because he said, I really, you know, my wife and I want to be ready for when we get old, because you know, just in case when we get old, we can't. He still likes to play golf, and he doesn't know how much, you know, how many more years he has to maintain his house. It's right. Lindy Palin.
Yeah. Oh.
Lindy is worried about getting old. He's 93.
Yeah, he's worried about getting old.
He still plays golf. He and his wife are, but you know, he was telling me, he says, you know, Scott, I just bought a condo. And I said, why did you buy that? You moving out? He says, no. He said, we're just, Evie and I are just planning for when we get old that we're ready. So
isn't he a class act?
Oh, he is. Doesn't he look like the bomber pilot?
You know,
that he was?
when I first met him, and you know, when I first came here, And the same thing, then I found out that he was a pilot in World War II. He was just he's that handsome cut of a guy, and you look at him and you go, yeah, he would be that guy.
You know, he is. He's one of those. He's been on my show a number of times on my different shows for different reasons, and you know, you just, you know, they don't make too many people like him anymore. And to give Evie, Evie's a outstanding, outspoken person of her own self.
I shared with him a few years ago, there's a museum out of Florida that still flies the B-17s, the B-24, the B-25, the Liberators and stuff like that. And they came to Havasu for an air show. And so I was able to get on that plane along with a couple of friends of mine, and I flew in a B-17. And what was so fun, Scott, about it was I thought about people like Lindy and my dad who had experienced all of that sort of stuff. And then there on that flight with us were 3 World War II veterans. And it was just, I mean, it was a tearjerker, because these guys, I mean, for them it was nostalgia. One of the guys was already suffering some dementia issues, but he had been a radio man. They put him in front of that radio thing, and it was like all that disappeared, and for a brief time he was where he wanted to be.
I just barely, well, this June I brought Joe Queenan, who's 91, who lives in Derby Line, 91 going on 60. I brought him on an honor flight to the World War II Monument Memorial in Washington, D.C. And he absolutely loved it. Of course, when you go on an honor flight, it's all kinds of pomp and circumstances. They have the Patriot Guard, a bunch of motorcyclists who they roll out the red carpet for you. And he was just saying, if I were to die today, he said that he just could not believe. But it's that generation that makes me realize how easy. You know, I know both of us. Neither one of us were born with silver spoons. I think both of us were maybe plastic, wood spoons.
Probably.
But I think we had it really easy compared to the generations before us.
Yeah. Well, and I had told this story too, that my dad had he and 5 of his brothers, 6 altogether, went to World War II, all saw combat, all came back alive. My grandmother had 6 stars in her window, and so that was quite a tale. But 3 went to the Pacific, 3 went to the European theater. They went in shortly after the Sullivan Brothers incident. You know, that's when they said they would break up the families, and they would nobody would go to the same. It wouldn't be on the same ship or anything. There was one brother left who was 16 and tried lying like hell to get in, but you know, thank God, he was at home, so they didn't have a Sergeant Ryan kind of thing on their hands there.
So we only have a little bit longer. We've already gone like 20 minutes over, but that's okay. Do you see any correlations between Lake Havasu and Newport? Are they, you know, other than or is the only thing that separates us is the climate, the mountains, or is there anything?
No, I think, like I said, our downtown, although much newer, but not very pretty architecture some places, is going through a transition and changing. I think that, you know, we will always be in Arizona a very big deal as far as tourism, and I think that's another element that's growing here. You know, I mean, as you revitalize your Main Street and everything, you know, this is a beautiful place to come to, you know. And so I think, you know, like you and I talked about, we just said they're in Maine, there's wonderful places, Bar Harbor, I've been to Kennebunk and all those places, but you still just absolutely have this gorgeous lake here, you know. And so, you know, I think in that respect, certainly one town very, very new in its, you know, in what's going on. The other one, you know, very, very steeped in history, but still a lot of the same thing. Right. You know, that RUDAT study, when we did ours in Arizona, it's kind of been our guiding map, and it was really funny. You have to be patient with that study and continue to go back and look at it, because we're starting to change our downtown with putting in some medians in the streets, some bump outs, slowing traffic down, you know, creating more of a pedestrian-friendly, you know, area and stuff like that.
Sometimes I have a hard time even, you know, keeping track of different groups, though. Is like you got, I think the Renaissance group is still, which I think arose out of the RUDAT. I think they're still around, but then you got the Chamber, and you
There's
know,
a gentleman, Frank Knowles.
Right.
Right, and I went to a Rotary function this last weekend. They were celebrating their 90th birthday as a club. That's
Right.
amazing, huh? So I was talking with him, and you know, I just told him, I said, I think, you know, hang on to that Rudat stuff and just keep, you know, it's not the Bible, but it's a guideline. You know, I mean, you guys brought in some group of high-powered professionals, and really all it cost you was their expenses. And so, you know, when you have people like that working for you, we don't all get that opportunity to tap that kind of resource and say, you know, how do you see it? Because it's always neat, Scott, I think, when you look at it from an outsider's eyes, you know. I mean, you'll come to Havasu and say, you know what, that's pretty cool, but maybe you bring a new idea, you know,
Right.
and say, Gary, do you guys ever think about doing this, you know? And so, you know, you sit there and say, yeah.
even my kids, when they return home, which is with my daughter, it's a little more frequent because she lives closer by. But my sons, who live in northern Maine, when they come home, they see things that I don't see, and most of it's actually good. You know, they look at Newport over the years, and they've seen a lot of positives happening. Every once in a while, like for example, the one thing that they do notice about downtown Newport, they're a bit concerned is the length of the main street is so short. You know, they don't know how you're gonna. You know, that is a problem that they said you can't really overcome too easily.
Yeah, but you know, in a way, maybe that can be a blessing in itself, because it can create that neat little area.
Right.
You know, very, you know, you're not dealing with blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of situations. You've got that one long block area from the state building, you know, up to the library, and you know, and kind of City Hall. And so, you know, maybe if it was longer or bigger, it would be more of a problem. I think, you know, you can route the trucks around and some things like that can keep that more pedestrian friendly.
You know, in my travels, and I'm sure you will agree with this, have you, like, I think in northern Maine, where they used to have a vibrant wood business, you go through some of those communities, and, you know, I mean northern Maine, you go through some of those communities, and you see how decimated they have been economically. And then you look at Newport, and we have so much more, you know, like they're struggling because they no longer have anything to really grasp a hold of. They don't have that big lake sitting in their yard. And so we have so much more to offer than many other places, because there are some places, like I was even out in the last time I was out in the West, I had a blast out there. But there's places I saw out there that were just like, where would I begin? Where would I begin to, you know, help revitalize?
I just had that experience. I went to a conference just this last month in Globe, Miami, and that's eastern Arizona, and they're copper mining towns. Okay, so they are truly dependent on one business. And their towns, and in the thriving days of copper, they had beautiful old downtowns, like a lot like Newport. And then they went into terrible disarray. You know, I mean, you know, the mining business, the copper prices went down. Some of the bigger ones pulled out. But now some of these big companies are a lot more stable. Mac Moran, other big copper producers. And I went downtown, and so what they've done is where they don't have a lake or anything, they've embraced their culture. And what they've done is, I went into the town that evening, and the tour that took place was done, and everybody was dressed up like their ambassadors in turn of the century country Western clothing. You know, the saloon gals, the ladies with their long skirts, the guys, you know, the mountain men. They toured. They took you around through all the bars and restaurants and showed you and talked about the history of the town. So what they're doing in trying to revitalize their community is embracing what they were 100, 150 years ago.
Ooh, I think that's so great, because I think sometimes this region has, you know, sometimes been so busy trying to whitewash its history, trying to whitewash it to that you know, some of the, like, when was like, if you really see the area promoted, this is a hunting and fishing area, but you very seldom see, especially hunting, because it's not politically correct, and to hunt, and you just, you know, and I know I drive some people crazy, and I embrace that, because like I even write, I've used your grandmother-in-law Ruth Austin to reminisce about the days of the Ku Klux Klan cross burnings that used to happen at the
part of
City
the
Ridge.
history here.
And it's not a good part of our history. It's not a part that we ought to embrace and to celebrate, but it's a part that we need to know. It's like, for example, I'm doing a series on space research, and that was located in Jay and then Highwater, Quebec. It was a great paying job, but then there's the underworld side of it, of gun dealing, and the founder of it, Gerald Bull, was eventually assassinated by the Mossad. Well, apparently by the Mossad.
Apparently, yes.
And I don't want to.
Allegedly, got to use that word. Allegedly.
Yeah, I don't really want to get on the Mossad's bad side.
No, God, no.
But you know, all of this is what makes us who we are, for good or bad. But there's so much richness of our history that I think sometimes is just being whitewashed.
Well, you know, too, but you know, you start to look around, and you made me start to think about it. You know, the railroad was the rich part of this culture. You know, maybe there'll come a day when you have a railroad day here and celebrate the railroad.
You know what?
And everybody dress up and wear the old railroad costumes and stuff like that. And then downtown, I mean, you have such a rich, I look at the old pictures of the downtown, and you can do turn of the century or 1800 stuff and just bring it back for that nostalgia, because it's there, and it's so rich.
Well, I've said this tongue in cheek, and I say this totally respectful, because I actually don't have an issue with the people who, I think it's been exaggerated about the people who hang out on Main Street. There's far less people just hanging out on Main Street than when I grew up. And no, when I was a teenager, we were not all these, you know, we like to fantasize about what we were. But I jokingly say, well, if you don't like those people hanging out, why don't you buy them period clothes and let them sit there in their period clothes, you know, whatever, 1920s, you can, so then they will fit in with a certain era. But
yeah, all ideas and stuff like that. But you know, again, I guess, you know, I talk to everybody up here and say, you know, come out and see a flip side of the scale out in Arizona. And I just do a quick plug. If anybody's interested, there's a website. It's called Go Lake Havasu, and it's GOLAKEHAVASU.com. And it's probably one of the, we were fortunate enough to get a guy from Huntington Beach as our director for our Visitors and Convention Bureau business. And he actually coined the phrase Surf City for Huntington. And so we have actually gone through now a whole thing where we've come up with the phrase. We're going through a wayfinding study right now. We finished it up, you know, on signage to try to coordinate all the signs so they look nice. So, but it gives you an idea what you can do at the other end of the scale. Maybe some ideas that may or may not fit in Newport. But you know, you don't always have to reinvent that wheel. You know, you can look at another community and say, you know what, we can pick this and pick that and do this.
Well, if I could pick it, I would like to bring up some of your weather up here. Have it about 70 degrees in the winter, but plenty of snow. I know that's
kind of a tough call.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one.
Yeah.
But because I don't mind the snow, but I'm going to tell you, you picked a good winter this last winter not to be up here, because I think there was a lot of people cursing Mother Nature, cursing the electrical companies, cursing the fuel companies. But it was this last winter, we'd forgotten what a Northeast Kingdom winter was like.
You know, and it's funny, Scott, because we had in Arizona the nicest winter I can ever remember. We have a balloon fest. It's a hot air balloon. It takes place in January. It's our 4th year. We had 80 balloons, 17,000 visitors to our town for those 4 or 5 days, and we had 4 perfect days of wind. And what the problem is, it's like, you know, here, even if you have a mild winter, everybody goes, oh, that's really cool. So they'll come back because next year thinking it's going to be a mild winter. We're probably going to get a whole lot of visitors again this year because they had such a wonderful winter last year. I mean, you know, so, and as you know, when you come out, we boat literally year round, and you fish year round. So,
okay, well, we have to wrap this up.
Okay.
Final word to the view. What are your final words to the viewers?
Well, I guess, again, I really like coming and visiting the kingdom, and my experiences here were terrific. With some challenging times during that time, certainly for citizens, but I got to meet people like you, and my friend Jim Campbell, just a wonderful bunch of people. So, the town, I think, is headed in the right direction. I think you really hit on it. Be a little patient. Help people like Bill Stinger move things along. Don't become his negative foe. Say, what can I do to help? It's come this far, right? I mean, the downtown has been purchased down there now, so and I really do. I'm actually gonna stay on for a week longer here and get in some serious fishing.
Okay.
So love to fish this lake. So.
Okay, thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.